We are joined on the phone today by Darryl Bullock. He is the author of the books The World's Worst Records, Volume 1 and Volume 2. How are you today, Darryl?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, and I'm excited to talk to you about these books. I love this sort of thing. And can you tell the listeners a little bit about how you kind of got involved in the world of worst records?
Sure. I started work when I was just 16 years old, many years ago now, for a chain of record stores here in England. And one of my first jobs was a singles buyer. So it was kind of my responsibility to meet with representatives to record companies every week. They'd come in and they'd usually have a bunch of records they'd hope would be suitable for chart placement. The next hit by, I don't know, the 80s, so it was Queen or Paul McCartney or something like that. But they'd always have something terrible as well, which they had to get into the shop. We were known as a chart return shop, which meant that everything we sold added up to the British singles chart. So they'd always have some rubbish which they'd have to get into us, just in the hope that we'd stock it. And I started collecting these really bad records. And then from there, I discovered an American company called Rhino, who had issued a volume also called The World's Worst Records, a volume, a compilation of various bad songs. And it kind of lifted off from there.
So in your quest to find these bad records, have you found that does the UK have a better selection than the US, or how has that been?
I guess it's subjective. I think the real awful ones tend to be American, and that's just because you've got a much bigger scene there. You've got more people making music, and you've got more small companies. You've had more small companies, especially during the 50s and 60s, who were willing to take a risk on certain things. But I think kind of as far as recorded music goes, you started the ball rolling with people like Florence Foster Jenkins back in the 1940s, and it's gone on from there.
So what would you say is it about these bad records that you enjoy? Is it just the nostalgia of being in the record store and finding them, or the novelty of it, or what is it about them?
I think what it is I appreciate people who have a go at stuff, even if they're not very good. I like the fact that they try their best and end up doing something that isn't that great. Kind of like bad movies. If you think of someone like Ed Wood, who did Plan 9 from Outer Space, he was really sincere about what he did, and that's kind of why I like people like I've said, Florence Foster Jenkins, or some of the kind of the awful death discs that came out in the 60s, or someone like I've forgotten his name now. The guy who produced Stardust Cowboys Paralyzed, I've forgotten his name. I can't think of his name for the life of me. Major Bill Smith, who produced loads of really, really bad records. They were always very sincere about what they did. They really cared about what they did, even though they didn't maybe appreciate how terrible it was. I like the fact that they cared about what they were doing. I don't really like novelty records. They're really easy to make. You've got to really kind of put some craft into making a truly bad record.
Yeah, for sure. Again, we're on the phone today with Darryl Bullock. He's the author of the World's Worst Records books. And you mentioned working in the record business or the record store scene, so you probably have a pretty sizable collection. And a lot of people think that this stuff is maybe worthless because they don't enjoy the music, but I got to imagine some of it's pretty valuable at this point.
Well, some of it certainly is valuable, and we talked there briefly about Florence Foster Jenkins. She only released a handful of shellac 78s in her lifetime, and those are incredibly collectible now. With the new film being made with Meryl Streep this year, which is currently being filmed over here in England, I mean, her interest in her is going to go through the roof this year. There'll be, people will be spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on her records, which maybe 10 years ago you could pick up for next to nothing. Certainly, there's a cult following for a lot of these what I would term bad records. especially if you look at the kind of strange records that happened maybe in the 60s. There's lots of stuff attached to TV shows like Batman and Star Trek. Those are all very highly collectible, and collectors desperately want those kind of early and original releases. Things like Burgess Meredith, who played the Penguin in the Batman, released some singles. Those are awful, and the collectors love them, and they're certainly going up in value. There's a definite kind of there's a cult of bad music out there, and people will pay for good bad stuff. Yeah.
Now, have you had much contact with any of these artists? And do you kind of feel, I don't know if guilty is the word, but maybe some of these people, they put all this work into releasing these albums, and they don't realize that some people kind of perceive it as a joke, maybe.
I think I've been really lucky over the last. I've been writing the blog, which accompanies the books, for 7-8 years now, and I've been very lucky to talk to and interview quite a few people over the course of those few years. Most of them actually appreciate that what I'm doing is not necessarily making fun of them. It's really kind of celebrating the fact that they did something that's quite unique, and I really want to share this with people. There's an American singer called Troy Hess, whose father Benny was very well known around Nashville. Troy made a whole load of records when he was in his pre-teens, kind of age 3 and 4, right through till he was about 11, 12. When I first approached him, he wasn't overly happy about it, but he soon came around, and he's been absolutely lovely. He was really helpful. He allowed me to interview him for the latest book, and he's just been delightful. Another American singer, a lady called Barbara Marquez, made a series of quite rude disco records in the late 70s, early 80s. She saw herself, I think, as a kind of Bette Midler act, but the disco records she made are exceptionally rude. I couldn't mention the titles here now, but very, very funny, and I absolutely love them. She, again, when I first approached her, was a bit unsure about it, but once I kind of assured her that what I didn't want to do was make fun of her, but really was to kind of celebrate the fact that she'd done something which people around the world actually find highly enjoyable, she was lovely. She was very, very sweet and very kind. And I found most people that I have interviewed or have been good enough to spend time corresponding with me have all taken it in good fun. I don't think I've upset anybody yet, although there's always the first time.
Yeah, that's good to hear that people are kind of understanding what you're trying to achieve. And I mentioned that I'm a big fan of this kind of stuff as well. I've always been partial to Mrs. Miller, and it always bummed me out that she really put all she had into it, and some of the record labels kind of knew it wasn't good, and she wasn't in on the joke.
I adore Mrs. Miller, Elva Miller. She was just fantastic, and I really like her as a character. I think, I don't know if you know the story, but when she absolutely wasn't in on the joke. Capitol signed her up, expecting to kind of ride that novelty wave of things like Tiny Tim and other stuff that was happening around that period. And she didn't know about it. She was really unaware of the fact that people were taking the rise out of her. And when she did find out, she was so furious that she stormed into, I think it was the Capitol Tower in L.A., saw one of those kind of standees of herself holding her 2 hit albums, punched it to the floor and jumped up and down on it, and then stormed up to the A&R guy's office and demanded to be let off Capitol. So she left Capitol and went and signed to a small independent label, and then set up her own label to produce her own records. I think she's a fantastic character, really, really interesting woman, and made some wonderful records.
Yeah, and it seems like that kind of period, maybe the 60s or 70s, as you were mentioning, was really kind of the place to find a lot of that great stuff. Do you think now with YouTube and so many people out there having access to putting out music and maybe intentionally putting out bad music, do you think, maybe that golden period is over with?
I think the 60s and possibly the 70s were absolutely the golden period. There was... and I think a lot of that was down to the fact that there were so many companies who were willing to take a risk. people were more attuned to buying what you might loosely term to be novelties. They'd listen to anything. Radio was a bit more open to playing anything. These days, I don't know if it's the same situation in America, but in England, in Britain, radio is very, very rigid. Our national radio stations don't want to play anything unless they think it might chart. There's very little chance to get anything out. In the 60s on British radio, they'd sign up bands to play live in the studio. You don't hear you still get some of that, but not much anymore. They were a lot more open to, or certainly in the mid-60s, a lot more open to the kind of new sounds that were happening. And also, I think television, we had, with probably in the States with things like maybe Laugh-In, over here with different kind of pop shows and comedy shows. They were just a bit more open to people being a little, out of the ordinary, a little different, a little odd, a little eccentric. You don't get that now, and I think the shame of stuff like YouTube is it's easy for anybody to do that, but it's also very easy to see through. You can see if it's sincere or not. I think you can hear if it's kind of meant or not. I recently came across a young Canadian guy by the name of Cody Robertson, who has issued a couple of albums which he's pretty much self-financed. I think he did the second one through a kind of crowdfunding. And they're absolutely awful. They're mind-blowingly terrible records. And he knows that, but he knows that a lot of people think they're awful. He obviously loves what he does. His family love what he does, and his friends love what he does. But he's been more than happy to be featured on the blog. I think he's quite happy just to get the exposure, But he also takes it tongue-in-cheek. He knows that not everyone's going to like what he does. And if people think it's a joke, then fine, as long as they're still listening.
Yeah, and again, you have the two books out, The World's Worst Records, Volume 1 and 2, and also you got a CD that's coming out too, is that right?
That's right, yeah. It's going to be a limited-run CD, which is, I think it features 23 tracks, all of which are kind of, or most of which have been featured in the first two books. There are a lot of song poems on there. Those kind of records that people used to make in the 60s. They'd send in their terrible lyrics to a company and $50 or $100, and suddenly they get back half a dozen copies of a record, which was made very half-heartedly. There's quite a few of those on there. There's an unreleased Mrs. Miller track on there, which you won't find anywhere else. There's a very rare track by Leona Anderson, who released a fantastic album in the 50s called Music to Suffer By. There's some really rare stuff on there. There's a rare Florence Foster Jenkins track, which has been remastered from the original 78. So it's there's some nice stuff on there. And some stuff that's never been available on CD before.
Yeah, awesome for sure. It's great that there's guys like you, Darryl, who are out there trying to preserve this music history. And if the listeners out there want to get a hold of the books or the CD or find out more information, where would you send them to?
Go to Amazon. Go to Amazon and just type in World's Worst Records, and you'll find them all. I think the CD should be available in a couple of weeks' time. But depending on where this is this going out live or is this going out later? And the books are available now. Thank you very much. There's the blog. Just search World's Worst Records in your chosen search engine, and you'll find it. And what I try to do is every Friday I put up a couple of new tracks up there. And it's nice to get a conversation going with people who come along and listen and have opinions and sometimes, have some information about how these records are made.
Excellent. Again, Darryl, thanks a lot for being on with me today. I really think this is awesome work you're doing.
Thank you very much. This is a great pleasure talking to you. You take care now. Bye-bye.